Alrighty. So where we left off last time was we had kind of really finished the sculpting, right? We kind of just wanted to show off things like masks and the drag dot and a couple of the stroke features for the gear and armor. What I want to do is I actually want to make a video, two shorter ones for this week, on baking normal maps down for both of our gear. This first one will be this one. It'll probably be a bit of a shorter video, but what we need to do is we need to take this geometry, right? This high resolution geometry, right? Because this is, total, both of these, a few million polygons, right? And Blender can go way higher than this. It really depends on your computer, those kinds of things, right? Whatever device you're on. So if you can't push, to 10, 15 million, don't worry about it, right? Just do what your device can handle. Just as long as you're showing me some good basics, it's what we're looking for, particularly on this one. What we need to do, though, is this needs to be something that can go on a low resolution mesh, right? Video game models aren't pushing several million polygon meshes. Unreal Engine 5, it looks like we'll be able to do that, but Unreal Engine 5 is really not going to be this kind of standard that all kinds of studios are working with, and really for like another year or two, right? Because they're just getting ready to release it, and games are already being built in Unreal Engine 4 or things like that. And generally we still try to make things fairly efficient. So what we want to do is we want to take these polygons, right, millions of polygons, and what we do is we want to usually call what's baking, right? We bake, B-A-K-E, right? Bake. And what we do is we take these polygons, right? And one of the things I've talked about a couple times now, and it's eventually going to be a vocab word, is normal direction, right? And normal direction is really just the direction the polygon is facing, right? So these polygons right here are kind of facing out this direction. These polygons right here are facing downward, right? These polygons right here are kind of facing this way. These polygons right here are facing that way. These ones are pointing this way. So it's really kind of normal directions, just the direction a polygon is like pointing, right? Looking towards, facing. And what a normal map is you're really just taking the normal directions of millions of polygons and you're converting them into a colored pixel, right? And a colored pixel is really just a square of color, right? And depending on which direction it pushes, it'll have a red, green, or blue to kind of match the axes, right? But also, at the same time, it's, you'll have things that aren't exactly perfectly X, Y, Z. And so you'll get, like, not just reds and blues, but you get, like, magenta, and you get teal, right? So it really will take the normal direction and give it a color depending on exactly which axis or in between axes it's pointing on. So particularly when you bake tangent-based normal maps, which Blender supports baking object and tangent space, there's no real difference in quality, and we'll just keep using tangents because they work well inside of regular 3D software. It's really more of a specific games thing. Object-based normal maps look different than a tangent-based normal map, but they don't look better actually in-game. But they do can take some shortcuts that make them process more efficiently in a game. And that's for objects like buildings, desks, things that don't move, right? That just are stationary. Environmental stuff. Tangent space is for stuff that moves, particularly characters, creatures. Things that deform and change shape. They need a bit more, a different coloring map scheme that actually carries a little bit more information. So, like I said, you can't visually see the difference between a tangent and an object space normal map in Engine or even in 3D, really. But object space does come with some shortcuts it can use to make it run more efficiently in terms of processing power in a game engine. So the quality of the map is not different. They pretty much look identical, but there's kind of some overhead that a tangent space normal map has that allows it to work better for objects that squash, stretch, move, deform, right, legs move, and all that stuff. So characters, creatures in particular use tangent space. Tangent space actually works great. Since we're not worrying about this running in a game engine, we'll just do tangent space for us. But I just want to kind of briefly talk about that a little bit. But really a normal map is just, it's going to create a texture, right, a two-dimensional image of pixels, squares of color, that really are just kind of taking the normal directions. In tangent space, you'll see red, green, blue, you'll see teal, magenta, you'll kind of see this predominant purple, which is kind of the neutral color for tangent space normal map. So that's what we're going to do. Now, eventually I'm going to show you guys the text tool add-on, but not on this project, right? I kind of want to try to keep this project down to just the basics. There's a couple of add-ons that Blender comes with that it comes with that you turn on. I've kind of shown that in a couple of videos. We'll talk about it more in our next project that are useful. But there's a couple of free add-ons that are actually pretty great too. And I'll eventually talk to you guys about those. It's part of what's great about Blender. There's this huge community that's done a bunch of free add-ons and occasionally some paid ones, but even the paid ones are usually not ridiculously expensive. I'm not going to make you guys use the paid ones, right? I will talk about a cool one, though, that I love, BPainter. But for us, we're just going to use the default baking tools in Blender, which are pretty good. The text tools comes with its own baking tools that can be even easier to use, but we'll save that for later. I want you guys to get to know the default ones. So really for us, what we have to do to get this working is, one, we're going to go away from the sculpting to the shading menu, right? So we're going to go to shading here. And shading is really going to kind of show you your actual node network for materials. Now, some of you guys remember this from Maya, and we did briefly with stuff with the Blender. The Blender one's actually more user-friendly, even though it is a nodal-based system. And you'll see this is just that principled material that we've seen before, right? So these right here, that's just these, and you can just plug stuff in from right here. So that's one of the things. We want to go to shading. It just makes it a little easier to do this. I also need 2 versions of this, right? Technically, there is actually a bake from Multi-Res, but I found that it makes the normal map pretty muted, which we don't really want. So I feel like the default one works better when we have a low-res and a high-res object, right? So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this, right? So if I right-click on crab body, you see there's a copy, Control-C. And then you could right-click again to, and I'll just probably go up to collection here, just make sure to paste it in the collection. Paste. And it pastes it right in this collection. I'll talk to you guys more about collections. It's kind of like grouping, basically. But you'll see there's now 2 crab bodies, right? There's the high res. I'm going to turn the eyeball off for that moment. Here's the low res. Now, in this case, I'm just going to kind of double-click on that one, right? Because remember, if you double-click on it, you can name it. Let's call this crab body low, all right, because that's going to be our low res. And this one, I'm going to go back to my modifiers, because this one we want to be low res. So I'm actually just going to get rid of that modifier for it, right? So remember, you can just hit that X, and it just deletes the multi-resolution, and then you sculpt it. Now, you'll notice if I turn the visibility back on for the high res, it's still there. That's why we copied it, right? Because we have this one that's got the multi-res modifier on it, and then we've got the low res, which doesn't. And what's going to happen is that the low res is going to basically search off from its surface to grab the mesh that is around it, right? Grab the mesh that is around it. And so that's actually pretty cool. It's pretty neat. In this case, what we're going to do, though, is we're going to, yeah, so that's exactly what we're going to do. Basically, it's these polygons, the low-res polygons are going to search out. And whenever they run into the high-res mesh, and it's hundreds of thousands of nodes polygons, it's going to take those and kind of extract those normal directions and match them to the low-res polygons. So really, you're kind of extracting the detail as a texture map to the low-res. So in this case, we select the low-res first, and then we shift-click the body, right? So that way we kind of have both selected. And I need to create a texture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Add. Right, there's an Add menu here. And you'll see that there is an area called Texture. And what we can do is we can go to Image Texture, right? We've kind of seen this before a little bit. We saw it more as the material systems than the shader menu. But Image Texture, right? And it creates an Image Texture node. Now remember, we're in the shading menu just because it makes it a little easier to work with this. And you see that this is really that little node that we kind of use to do some sculpting as well as kind of apply the distortion grid before, but we're doing it from this menu now instead of through here. Now in this case, I can create a new one, right? So I'll just go New. And for us, we'll just go 2048 by 2048, because that'll capture about 4 million, because we didn't really push the polygon resolutions that high for this, right? So that'll capture basically about 4 million polygons worth of data, which that's well within what we're doing for this project. Just think of it as 2,000 times 2,000 is 4 million, right? 1,000, if it's 1024 to 1024, that's 1 million, things like that. Also, normal maps work better as 32-bit floating point, particularly in Blender. So we'll just turn this on so it makes the bit depth higher, so the texture quality is higher. And then we're going to hit OK. And there is our texture node. Now in this case, we don't have to plug it into anything yet. We just select it, right? So that way Blender knows that's the active one, right? So I've got, added, texture, image texture node, created a new one, We make sure it's the selected one, right? It's the active one. Make sure the node's selected, because you see how you can kind of click on these different nodes and they're highlighted white. So I can click on that one. Make sure your low res and your high res are selected and they're both visible, right? So there we go. And what we can do is, you see the kind of menu up here that looks like kind of a microwave, right? That is our rendering engine, right? Now by default it's set to Eevee, and that's the real-time rendering engine, which is actually pretty awesome. You have controls here. It's honestly pretty great. But you can actually click on this and switch to Cycles, which is the full renderer, right? It's the full renderer. And certain things are in here. Like you'll see that once we go to Rendering Engine and we click on the pull-down menu and switch to Cycles, we'll see that there is a Bake section down here, right? Bake. So we can open this up. Remember, this is just kind of the little microwave, kind of briefcase-looking one, because this is your rendering engine. And we see that there's a Bake area down here, right? Now in this case, we want to bake a normal map. So we go and switch bake type from combined to normal. There we go. You'll see that you can tell it to be a tangent or object. So if you ever need to bake object maps, there you go. You can even tell it to switch around the axes to invert them if you need to. Sometimes, depending on the game engine, you might need to switch the axis, right? But the defaults should work fine for us. The other thing we want to do is there's kind of the selected act to active. So what we'll do is we'll click that one. And this extrusion distance, there's a max ray distance, but I find extrusion distance actually works a bit better than the ray distance. It's kind of going to make the mesh a little bigger around the object, and that's going to do a good job of kind of being working a lot like a max ray distance one. So I'm going to set this to, like, say 0.7, right? And you can go back and try this out. Like if it's too little, you can turn it up, right? There's no exact number. So if you're going in here and you put the same number in as me and it gives you a different result, do not freak out, right? Since we're used to the default cube, it probably will, because our crabs should all roughly be similar sizes. But this is one of those things that it's not an absolute number. If you need to go up or down below this to get a better bake, do that, right? So don't kind of sit here and say, hey, I have to use exactly the number Mike does. You don't, right? You can go below or higher. This will be a good starting point, though, I think, for us. And I think will work pretty well for most of you guys. So once we've got that stuff, right, once we've got the extrusion up a little bit, selected to active, what we can do is we've changed our bake type to normal, and we make sure this is selected and both of our other objects are selected. We're going to hit bake. There we go. And you'll see down here it's actually going through the calculation process. You see it's at 0% right now. It'll start to get going quicker. They're 9/16, so it bakes pretty quickly. And then what you'll see is you'll see the normal map right here. And that's what you should basically see. That will be a pretty good bake for you. Now, if you want to, you could turn the distance a little lower to not maybe grab those, because it might be so high that it grabs kind of a few other parts that it doesn't want to. But generally, if you've got it pretty nice looking and it looks pretty clean, you're going to be okay, right? It is kind of one of those things where you just explore a little bit, play with it a little bit, see how it looks, see how the bake works. If you need to, you can go here and you could maybe turn it up to 1 and then hit bake. And what it'll do is it'll rebake it, right? So you can always go back in here, change that extrusion distance a little bit, and then just hit bake again, right? And that'll rebake that for us. All right. There we go. And you see, for the most part, it's doing pretty good. You just want to keep these things in mind as you're working, that you might want to go up and down that extrusion limit a little bit. This should work pretty well. Any small little problems like this, sometimes you can just paint those out. Yeah. And I just want to go default here. There's technically a cage setting. The actual baking features in the text tools actually pretty much always produce perfect normal maps. It's really cool. But I wanted to get you guys to see how to do it without that add-on, and to see that these tools work pretty well. I find extrusion distance is kind of what I use to kind of get a pretty good bake. And you see this will actually look pretty good. And you can see when you look at this, it's a map. You can kind of see those are the ridges on our claws. You can see that that's kind of the texturing we're doing. And you see it's got that predominant purple, but then you see kind of teals and magentas and kind of some darker purples. Because it's really just taking the normal direction of hundreds of thousands or millions of polygons and turning them into colored pixels. Now, once you've baked this here, you want to go there. Sorry, not there. This one right here, right? See the little kind of 3 bars? And you see there's an area called image that's got a little kind of asterisk. That means you have to save the image. So we go to image here, and we go to save. And what you could do then is you could actually, and I've kind of already did some test stuff on this, you can actually give it a proper name like crab body normal PNG, save as image, and there we go. That is now officially saved. Now at this point, I can go back up here and I can grab the high-res body, and I can just delete that, right? And here's our low-res, but you'll see there's nothing on it because we've created the normal map here, but we haven't plugged it into anything, all right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to left-click on the yellow dot right here. So I'm going to zoom in, see the yellow dot for color. I'm going to left-click on this, right, and drag. So you hold down your left mouse button on it, move, and it gives you this little line. And you connect it to the normal of the actual base mesh here. And you see it's kind of showing up there, but it's not perfect. And I want to be able to control it a little bit more. So what I do is I go to Add, and we go to Vector, right? So that's, remember how we went to Add, Texture, Image Texture. You go to Add Vector Normal Map, right? Now what's really cool is you see how it automatically has this here for you. Now the cool thing is, because I'm not even holding my mouse button down, right? It's the normal map's there. And you notice as I move my cursor over the line, it becomes white. And you put it right there and it actually connects it for you, which is super, super cool. And you see how it's starting to look a lot better on there. Now the cool thing is that, tangent, object space, world space, and you see how you can even use specific Blender options if you want to, right? I usually tell it to use UV map. And it has a strength controller. So if I want to, I could set this to 2, and it turns it up to show it off better. Now the other thing I always make sure to do is go to color space right here, set it to raw. It tends to work better raw. We might want to do UVs though. Actually, it looks a little weird there, but that is something you might want to consider. It depends on how it's going to work for you. If sRGB is working pretty well for you, stay with that. If you need raw, you can switch to that as well. But I usually also make sure to add a UV node to properly use the UVs. So what you can do is you can go to Add, and you can go to Input, right? Add Input UV Map. And this just drops us in here, and you see the kind of purple dot. And you just can click drag on these, left click drag to move them around. You see there's kind of this UV that's got a purple dot, left click drag it to vector. And then we can just tell it to use proper UVs. In this case, our sRGB is working pretty well for us. I have found sometimes you have to switch it to raw. So if sRGB is working well, stick with sRGB. If you need to switch it to raw, switch it to raw. Sometimes you have to do that for different engines. It really depends on kind of what your target is and what's working for you. So in this case, sRGB works pretty well for us in here. And one of the things you can even do after this, because you'll notice this is the low res now. See how it's not actually changing the surface? So that's the low res. And we've already kind of got that, right? That's just your regular shading. That's the Eevee, right? When you turn on, that's Eevee. You can kind of see this background here. Now what's really cool is if you go to this little pull down, you turn on scene lights. And what it'll do is it'll use the scene lights. Now in this case, the light's kind of off. So I'm going to click on the light here, turn the eyeball on. And it's kind of a point light, so you can kind of see it's just affecting this area a little bit. So once you have your light selected here, you'll notice that in this stack, you have this little light that's set up here, right? So you see a little green light bulb. And you go in here and you see how it's a point light, but you can set it to be sun, which is directional. It's a little too hot, right, at strength, so I set the strength to, like, say, 30. And now you can see that you've got your normal map showing up even cooler. But you can even see that Eevee actually has nice kind of shadowing, real-time previewing of the light. And it's pretty neat. So this is now that next stage. I'm going to save this. There we go. And what we'll do is I'll show you guys how to bake a normal map down on the gear in the next video so that you get 2 videos for that. I'll kind of go through how to do the light stuff again and those things. All right, so that'll probably be a great place to stop.